We're back to the Neil Haley Show, and my guest today is best-selling author Len Sciuto of Hades Crypt and much, much more. Len, thanks for stopping by again. We're going to really dive deeper into some more interesting topics today, aren't we?
I think so. There's a few things that, as I'm working on this fourth book, and that book is titled Desperate Countermeasures, I found out some things that I think it will be interesting to the public and the listening community this morning. First of all, I'll say to all of you that's listening, thank you so very much for helping us and supporting Hades Crypt. That book is #1 for week number 15 in the Kindle format. So thank you all that have bought the book if you have it, and those of you that are considering buying it, please buy it. It's an interesting story. So let's talk a little bit about, first of all, the Gerald Ford and the Abraham Lincoln. Khomeini has said that he's going to send that ship to the bottom. And one of the topics I was talking to one of my former commanding officers about, even though we have a Golden Dome system, even though these ships are high tech, if you send 50 or 100 missiles at one specific target, some are going to get through. That's a problem. Even for these big carriers, if you just put holes in the flight deck, then those planes have got no place to land. They're going to have to go to land bases somewhere, U.S. land bases in the Middle East. So that's the first thing. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier in a previous podcast, China is sending missile components of sodium perchlorate to Iran, and that sodium perchlorate is also used in nuclear fuel material enrichment. And those have to be shipped by China into Iran in specialized containers on 2 ships. I mentioned those on an earlier podcast as well. I have not been able to prove it, but looking at all of this and listening to the rhetoric that's going on, I suspect, and I cannot prove it, that China has been sending nuclear material under the table in those specialized containers because you can't open them and see what's inside to Iran. And that's some concern. The other aspect that's tangent to that is we know that there's a 4th nuclear enrichment facility in Iran, and we're not going to tolerate that. So I think that once the Ford is in place, I think we're going to see an armed conflict. And we know, since what's been going on with Iran, they play a delaying action. That means they say yes or 3 bags full. They agree, but they don't do, and then next thing they turn around and they're doing exactly what they want to do and create issues in the Middle East. Now, when I talk about the laser cannons, and I thought in the new book, I would include a second front, and that would be the use of illegal drugs. Now, when I first went into the Coast Guard, I was sent to Marine Safety Office. It's called an MSO, Port Arthur, Texas. That's the U.S. #1 port for the import of crude oil, natural gases, and liquefied gases. That's LNG and LPG gases. The Devil's Delegation book talks about a terrorist group that gets their hands on a Greek oil tanker ship, steals a nuclear device from the Russian submarine graveyard in the Bering Sea, puts it on the ship, covers it in crude oil, sails into a hurricane that's in the Gulf of Mexico with the intention of detonating it in the U.S. This Desperate Countermeasures book is the sequel to that book. Now, at a Marine Safety Office, as an officer there, I was an ensign to lieutenant there, we do inspections of foreign and American ships. That's because when the Argo Merchant went down over Cape Cod and spilled something like 800,000 gallons of crude oil, and we had to clean it up, preventing it entering our beaches and ruining sea fish, clam bells, shellfish beds, and the fishing industry. We started inspecting those ships. For one of the years that it was at the height, and that was 77 and 78, that port alone and that Coast Guard unit alone saw over 500 ships, inspected 500 ships. So there were two ships that were interesting. One I was on, we knew we had gotten a tip on from drug enforcement that this particular ship was carrying cocaine. So we inspected we boarded the vessel, we inspected it, and we started looking around, and we couldn't find the cocaine. We decided to drill a cofferdam, and that's basically a rectangular piece of ship that supports decks and ship structure, and it's usually a void space. So we drilled into this cofferdam, and when we pulled the drill out of the cofferdam, the drill bit was loaded with cocaine, so we seized the ship. The other aspect was we had a metal turning ship come in, and what those are is that material is always inflamed because I'll call them shrapnel pieces, are usually in oil because they use the oil to allow the unused pieces of steel to be eliminated by either cutting them off with a torch or shaving them off with a piece of machinery. And this stuff was in holes on this ship. We had gotten a tip that this ship was carrying drugs. So we brought a barge alongside, and we used a crane on the dock, and we started unloading cargo, these metal turnings, which were on fire, and putting them on the dock, in the barge, I should say, not on the dock. We were standing on the dock, and then we moved to the bridge area of the ship, because the deck area, when that stuff burns, is exceptionally hot. So what we found buried under these metal shavings was a Volkswagen, and it was loaded with heroin and cocaine. And so we seized the ship, we seized the crew, and that was the name of that tune, so to speak. Now, with the desperate countermeasures, the second front, and then when we're in an armed conflict, usually it's on two fronts. And the front in desperate countermeasures that I am considering is the use of illegal drugs in the story. And because I'm former Coast Guard of 24 years and my 36 years in the military, I did the research on this, and this is interesting. In 2024, the United States Coast Guard nationwide sealed over 117 sealed the exact number, 117.2 tons of fentanyl alone. Now, what's interesting about the fentanyl, it is a modified opioid, and it comes predominantly from 4 countries. Those countries are China, Mexico, Colombia, and of course, Venezuela. Now, China has a dual role. They ship it into Mexico, or they bring it in directly, or attempt to bring it in directly to the United States. That fentanyl, like I mentioned, is 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than the cocaine or heroin. It's a killer. If you were to take 2 milligrams of this fentanyl, it's enough to kill you. 2 milligrams. That equates out, if you look at granulated sugar, Neil, that's 5 grains of sugar. That's it. Just 5 of those grains are enough to kill you. In 2024, in the United States, 48,422 Americans died from fentanyl overdose. 48,422. That amounts, if you look at it on a day basis, 133 people dying every day. The number of those that were hospitalized with overdoses were 9,490, or 26 a day. So just from fentanyl alone, if you do the people that died from it and the people that were affected by it and had to be treated for it, it's 159 people a day on fentanyl. Now, the other interesting aspect of this fentanyl is if you were to take that 117.2 tons and look at the market value, drug cartels in 2024 lost in money, okay, $21.3 trillion because we seized it. That is unbelievable to me. That gives you an idea of what our Coast Guard and the men and women who board these ships and inspect them, and now we're seizing them for crude oil, which is part of the issues that are going on today, are doing a fantastic job. And of course, the drug cartels look for all kinds of different ways of bringing these illegal drugs into our country. And it's going to be a problem. If you were out there and someone in your family dies from an overdose of this stuff, you have to be not only distraught, you have to be angry at the fact that this stuff got into our country and took one of your family members. We had a couple visiting us last night, and they lost a grandson to fentanyl. Now, one of the other things that was going on with the open borders between 20 and 24, this fentanyl was coming in because we were not vetting these people crossing the border. And to get people hooked on this, they were melting this stuff down and coating dollar bills. They were putting it on door handles of cars so that you would get a high from this drug. And if you didn't know what was going on and you had it a couple of times, you became hooked on this drug. It's unbelievable. That's what I'm thinking about putting in the book as a second front. But there are a couple of others I'm thinking about, but I'm not going to do that right now. I think the other aspect of this is, I mentioned earlier, during Desert Storm and Shield, when I walked away from that war, the United States Navy had 954 ships in its closet. Of those 954, that included active duty ships like the carrier battle groups that are in the Mediterranean now and throughout the world, and mothball ships and ships that are in reserve. Those are the tankers that refuel those ships that are still on the seas, using fossil fuel as a propellant. Many of the ships today are nuclear, like the Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald Ford both have multiple nuclear reactors to propel it. In today's world, that number of ships, which was 954 in 1992, today, that total number is only 451. Now, if we look at the active duty side of things, there are 288 active duty ships. Of those 288, 79 of those are submarines. Now, of those submarines, hang on a second. Excuse me. Those submarines are 79 in number. 14 of those are what we call missile carriers. They carry Tomahawk and cruise missiles. And those missiles can carry nuclear warheads. The rest are all what we call hunter killers. The Hades Crypt book, between the Russian submarines in that book and the American submarines in that book, are all hunter killers. There, in the old Navy, when I was on my first diesel boat, when I first went into the military, I spent 12 years in the Navy in reserves and submarines, naval reserve and submarines, and 24 in the Coast Guard. So my first submarine on active duty was a diesel boat from World War II. Her hull number was 385, called the USS Bang. And our sonar dome was on the keel, under the forward torpedo room. And it was like 15 feet long, and it had a diameter of about 10 feet. And there was no computer system attached to it. You relied solely on the sonar operator and his experience in listening and trying to determine what that ship was and possibly what country it was built in and in front of you somewhere or detected by you somewhere. There's an electrical hum that comes through the water that sonar picks up. Now, we use 60 cycle. Some of the countries, foreign countries, go all the way down to 30, so it has a very lower sound in the water. And there are a couple that use a higher hum. So in today's technology for sonar on submarines, the nose of these nuclear boats that we have is where the sonar gear is. The first 32 feet of that submarine is all sonar gear. It's computerized, and we can detect not only the hum in the water, we can detect exactly what it is. We can also determine based upon that hum, what type of submarine it is, how fast is it, how deep can it go, what is the typical weaponry that's held on it. And so all of these pieces of information are important, especially like for an example, if we have an armed conflict in the Middle East on the seas, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, even possibly inside the Mediterranean, close to that country. And I'm positive that there are probably submarines there as well. I cannot tell you whether or not they're missile boats or whether they are hunter-killers. But we generally sailed throughout the globe with those boats. And right now, of the 288, due to the fewer that are active, those 79 missiles, in my personal opinion, are holding the line from a defensive posture for the United States. Wait a second, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, those guys, I know what I wanted to say. While I was there, I finished my sophomore year, and I got a letter from the Navy. They called me from active duty, and I was to active duty, and I was a student in good standing. And I called up the phone number on the letter I got, and I said, "Why are you guys calling me up?" I said, "I'm a student in good standing. I was a naval reservist at the time." And he said, "We're short quartermasters. That's the navigational rate, enlisted rate in the Navy. So my specialty was celestial navigation in one way, shape, or form, plus radio navigation." And he said, "We're short navigators. That's why you're being called to active duty." So I checked into Charleston, South Carolina, and the detailer said, because I was an E4 at that point in time, I had the opportunity to turn down the first two sets of orders, but I had to take the third. And I was talking to the detailer there. That's the person that assigns the orders. And he told me, and this was 1968, late 68, early 69, told me, and that was the height of the Vietnam War, that they were using quartermasters as helmsmen on the boat crews on the Delta in Vietnam. Those boats were fiberglass, and the guys that manned those boats would tell you that 50 caliber rounds would enter the boat, rattle around, and go out the other side. They could not be stopped. The life expectancies of those crews was 8 months. So because I had some training in submarines, I was fortunate to get to the USS Bang SS-385 and sail on her. The Tango Now in China Sea book is a result of our experiences in the Black Sea against the Russians at the height of the Cold War. Since 1950, the Navy's been collecting sonar tapes from friendly and unfriendly vessels. In 1970, Russia came out with a brand new vessel called Kashin-class guided missile frigate. It was typically one of the first of its kind, and we went in the Black Sea inside Russian territorial waters to get the sonar tapes on that ship. And that's still being done today on new ships that are coming out, if it's a different class of vessels. The issue with the books that I write are I have to be very careful about what I put in these books and what I talk about on these podcasts, because if I release or print in for the public review sensitive information, I could be in Leavenworth making little rocks out of big rocks. And I'm 80 years old now. I don't think it would be a meaningful work endeavor, so to speak. The first two books were a Navy and a Coast Guard book. Those books went to Coast Guard security divisions. And in Washington, they reviewed the books and said, they're fine, no issues, no problems. Hades Crypt, because it's all, again, fiction, I called into Kings Bay, Georgia, their security group. That's the submarine base that's closest to us here in Florida. And they said, you don't have to submit the book, because I gave them the synopsis. At any rate, I thought it was interesting for me to pass along the drug interdiction aspects of the United States Coast Guard. And the one thing that many people don't know, you'll hear that Coast Guard seized an illegal ship off Venezuela. Coast Guard boarded ships in the Straits of Hormuz here in Desert Shield and Storm. These guys either board the vessels by getting to the ships by boat, or in Desert Shield and Storm for the first time, they rappelled down to the main decks of those ships by helicopter. And when you see today's ships being interdicted, seized, or taken away from trying to get to its home port because what they're carrying is illegal or in disagreement with what the United States feels is a safe cargo, they seize those ships. But they all rappel down now. Now, the other aspect, and this is the final thing I'll talk about real quick, is Iran has been practicing war patrols, defensive maneuvers, and I saw a picture yesterday in the news of some of the missiles that they have, and I think they've got to have hundreds and hundreds of those missiles. If they send 50 of them toward the Ford or toward the Abraham Lincoln, there's going to be some serious damage. And if what I said was true about the possibility of them having nuclear material, and there's a possibility that maybe China shipped components for a nuclear device to China through those sodium perchlorate containers, and I can't prove that, and I can't document that. It's just a supposition or a hypothetical statement on my part. With a nuclear device going off in those carrier battle groups, the circular initial explosion area is 50 miles. They're going to take out every ship that's in that carrier battle group. Neil, I've been talking about doom and gloom here. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite interesting. So I think that your research keeps going in the book. When do you expect to be finished with it?
I'm hoping to get it out by hopefully the 4th of July. I was originally shooting for Easter, but Easter is March. And now I added 2 chapters. I'm only 31 chapters into it. And then I've got to go through the editing. And then I've got to go through picking out a cover. I have to, what's the word? I have to go through what they call the ISBN code. So copyright, that's what it is. I have to go through all of that. And then I want to make sure, because some of the things I'm writing about, I'll bounce it through Coast Guard again to make sure that I'm not putting anything out there that's sensitive. So,
yeah, awesome.
So I have to amend my finish date. Plus, there are things going on here. Sharon and I, my wife, and I are as a birthday and a Christmas present to her. She's never been to Italy, so I'm taking her to Italy in April. And then her ethnic background is her parents, and we're from Poland. Our church group has a group together going to Poland in May. I'll be out of touch with the book in April. And then in May, I'll be here by myself, and maybe I'll be able to finish it. And so that's why I amended it to the 4th of July, to go through all of the protocols that I have to go through to get it out to the marketplace.
All right. Excellent. Sounds good. Go to lensciuto.com. Appreciate it, Len, and we'll talk next week.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, listeners, for being with us. And I say God bless you all. God bless the United States. And thank you so very much for listening. And also thank you so very much for buying my book or considering to buy my book.
All right. That was the Neil Haley Show with Len Sciuto, guys. Take care.